Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Raven Lee. She's a mystic shamanic priestess. At least that's how I perceive her. And I asked her before the show, do you have a byline? Do you want me to kind of introduce you in a certain way? And she said, if that's what resonates with you, that's what we're going to go with. So that's just a little bit of taste of the kind of person Raven is. And yeah, let's get ready. We're in Pasadena, California, in her office. Raven, thanks for having me here. This is awesome. How you doing?
I'm great. This is fun.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. Can you just start out explain a little bit about what you do? What's your practice? How do you? You travel the world. You teach. Just kind of a overview, just so people get a sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a gift of ability to sense beyond this rational consciousness. For many number of years, I have been trained as a licensed therapist, and recognizing that from the very beginning, the founders of psychology, like William James, even said, this rational consciousness is simply one aspect of multiple consciousness. And if we apply the prerequisite stimulus, all the other dimensions will arise. So I think that is in some ways, as a psychotherapist or psychologist, I have been drawn to understand or be a helper of the psyche. And so 30 some years ago, a crisis kind of initiated me, so that was the prerequisite stimulus that woke me up, and I was able to see another dimension, something greater than our ego consciousness. And because of that, I spent the following 30 years to discover the power of spiritual consciousness. Because in that moment of non-dual awareness and pure light and grace, my depression, grief from a huge tragedy got lifted. And it was so astonishing that I just wanted to share that, wanting to find out in a way how to help people, so that I would say I wrote a book about it 2 years ago. It's called Unbinding the Soul.
Yep.
How do you wake up through tragedy, coming from compassion, realizing that there is a wiser part in all of us? It's like if all your life you think that you are just clouds of darkness, you don't realize that beyond the clouds is this beautiful infinite sky. So it all depending on our perspective. So in my work here as a private clinician, I still do therapy, but I definitely bring in spirituality. My doctorate is in transpersonal psychology, and I have a master's in as a licensed clinical social worker. So I definitely integrate the traditional, but go beyond that to the transpersonal. And I follow very much the founding father of psychology, William James, in helping people discover that right stimulus that will activate their ability to see beyond this rational consciousness. I think that all of us have actually experienced that suddenly something in your voice told you to do something, and it turned out to be the best thing in your life.
Yes. Can you talk about what this crisis was?
The crisis 30 some years ago was that my husband at that time had a psychotic breakdown, and then as a young mother, being Catholic, Chinese Catholic, told to just try to do the right thing, to endure it. But something in me says, no, this was dangerous. I saw he was being kind of a threat to my young children.
Right.
And I dared speak up to initiate a separation. And a month following that, he committed suicide.
Wow.
And I think that really, I went into the abyss of darkness because I thought it was my fault.
Right.
And so for 2 months, I was swirling in this darkness, despair, taking medication to help me because I was going into panic attacks, and holding down 2 jobs, trying to be a single mother. And a friend of mine took me to a meditation, and that began my ability. It was like something cracked open.
Right.
And I recognized, and I studied, and I went back to study neuroscience and understand that in the moment of crisis, our way of adaptation no longer work. So in that moment, it's like as if though the rug has been pulled from under us. But our human condition, human spirit is so amazing, as if though we are hardwired to grow, that within us there's a resilient spirit, that when we no longer keep adapting like a pattern, like automatic robotic reaction, there is actually a gateway, a doorway that we can begin to see beyond. And that was what happened to me.
Right. So you're saying if there's something that's so intense, so different from anything that we've ever experienced, that it
Yeah.
almost shocks our system into kind of shifting our consciousness and our
Exactly.
worldview on how we view the world.
Exactly, because we no longer can say, if only I'm a good person, if I did this right, all of the rational
Right.
way of saying, let me do this, let me plan this. In the moment of that crisis, everything that I have learned actually no longer served me.
Right.
It's like, and because of that, I had to drop into another kind of openness to discover an answer that really propelled me on a spiritual odyssey. Because in that moment, I saw past, present, future. I understood suffering. I felt the grace flow into me, and that all my symptoms went away, even though it was just for a couple of weeks.
And this was a couple of months after.
It was about 3 months after his
Okay.
suicide, and I was in the midst of this darkness, and that's why my
Right.
friend says, come to
Right.
this meditation. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to experience that. It is just
Right.
my path that just so happened.
Right.
Because ever since I was young, I felt a presence of something greater.
Right.
But I
Okay,
pushed
so
that
that's what
aside.
I actually want to ask about that. So you mentioned that after this crisis, you had this awakening, but growing up, did you kind of think, was this always inside you? Or did
Yeah.
this really kind of, after the crisis, it then opened it up? Or did you experiment at all with any of this stuff
Not so
before?
much. I experienced, like what I
Okay.
remember clearly when I was young, that I felt as if though I could hear voices, not
Right.
not like voices of like I hear voices.
Right.
I felt a presence. I felt that there was something bigger. And as a child, I would go up to the rooftop and I would sit looking at the sky, and I felt as if though I was like a being of light, like an angel. But of course, as a child, I had no words to describe this. But I think that many of us actually have been touched by this kind of an awareness of feeling like that we are greater than who we are, that we are interconnected. And as children, actually, scientists have said that as children, we are on a much more expanded wavelength called the
Right.
alpha, where we become more open. I think that open awareness of something greater is in all of us, but then doesn't mean that we all have access to it. So for me, because I think that as a child, I felt that and I pushed that aside. My crisis reawakened me,
Right.
but on a much greater level. And so part of my work, you asked me about my work, that's really what I'm teaching people. I am helping people who come to see me because they are in a crisis, challenges. And I guess I help them discover their own wisdom self and how to sit, teach them meditation. But I also begin to help them not get sucked into this suffering.
Right.
And begin to understand how that challenge may be a message for them to grow. And so I travel in Asia, in Europe, to do what I call shamanic healing, or I teach energy healing, and I teach meditation. Because it's important too, through meditation, to feel like a ground of your dynamic being, so that when you do other work of shamanic work, you are not like floating out of your body, but really connected to who you are.
Right.
So I'm very thankful. I don't see it as work. I just feel like I'm just simply being a guide or a messenger to help people to bring light into their darkness.
Right.
So
And you were you mentioned that you were raised Catholic.
mm-hmm.
Did this, in my personal experience, I think a lot of people have this experience, being raised Catholic, or even just in any very organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
It can turn people off of spirituality.
Absolutely, yeah. Because there's a huge difference between religion and spirituality.
Right.
For me, when I was young, I would feel the connection to God, or Christ. But the moment it became a dogma, I would feel like it became more like I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that.
Right.
I'm a sinner. I should go and do my confession. And so by the time I was 18, 19, the church itself no longer spoke to me, but I felt the faith. I felt the connection. But after the crisis, I was drawn to Buddhism because it was not a religion. It was like a philosophy,
Right.
like understanding the psychology. And because of that, I actually got back into my Catholic roots in a different way to truly understand the Gnostic, the gnosis, the direct knowing of what Christ was really teaching about.
Right.
That in all of us there is the human, Jesus, but the Christ is the spiritual awareness. So we as human, we are able to access this spiritual consciousness, our spiritual identity or our spiritual beingness. And when we connect to that, the way we are in our life becomes more joyful. So that instead of fearing what can happen, like always walking around looking at the next danger, or look at the world we are in right now.
Right.
It's like there's all this fear, but when we are truly connecting to our true essence, or realize that there is that other presence, we are no longer trapped into the fear or simply surviving. We are thriving, we are flourishing, and naturally we're going to be compassionate. But compassion doesn't mean rescuing. We feel that we are one with others, so we will naturally want to do the right thing or say the right thing.
Right. And you mentioned taking things from, would you call yourself a Buddhist? Or do you just take pieces from Buddhism? You mentioned you take pieces from you mentioned Jesus Christ. You take pieces from Catholicism. Is that kind of how you take different pieces from different things and then kind of make it personal for you?
I think it's beyond that. It's more that I experience certain truth, but I do definitely have more of a lineage, like it's called Burn. Burn is the indigenous religion of Tibet.
Okay.
And I found that this religion is not so dogmatic. It really teaches me to discover my true nature. And there is a very high teaching called Sukchen, which is about realizing who we truly are. And it was in a funny way, strange way, that in 2007, a vision came to me to actually go to southern France. And because of that, I got reconnected to Jesus Christ and to Marie Magdalena, to the sacred feminine. And I started studying the highest teaching of what Christ was saying.
Right. And I want to ask about the vision, because I think that's something that a lot of people would be curious about, because I don't think, unless someone is on some serious drugs, I think generally people aren't having visions, or when they hear about people having visions, it's kind of this, this thing that people aren't really familiar with or even open to. So can you talk a little bit more about how visions, even that one specifically, but also in general, how they come to you and how you experience them?
Okay. I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I hesitate to speak or share a lot. I mean, but in my book, Unbinding the Soul, I did speak about this vision, and about how even as a child, I would have a knowing, suddenly a knowingness about something, an image would arise, you know. So this vision is that I think in 2007, I was just invited by someone to come to France to give a talk. And it was like going out of my way. And I kept saying, well, why should I do that?
Right.
My rational ego part says, why?
Right.
But then I know enough by that time to say, that there must be a message here. So I actually did go into more of like what I teach my student, to do some journeying with an intention. I simply just said, may I see what is it that I needed to see.
So
in
journeying
France.
meaning you go into a meditative state?
I go into an altered state just
Okay.
by using breathing. I mean, it's
Okay.
like it happened like in a few minutes. It was like
Right.
I sat in a meditative pose. I put out my intention, and so I said, may I journey to France to see what it is that I needed to see.
Right.
And suddenly, like a gate opened, I flew to a place, and I could see that it was like by the side of a mountain, because there was like stone and rocks, but there was a doorway. So I went inside the doorway, and it was total darkness, but I just went in and I could see a flicker of light. And as the light kept guiding me, I came into this open space, and I could see these group of men facing out, like with strange insignia, like a guardians. And in the center of the circle was this beam of light, so bright. And as I look up the beam of light, was like a female face, and I said, why am I supposed to go to southern France? She told me one word, trust. And the moment she said that, I flew right back into my body. It was like as if though my consciousness,
Right.
like William James, the founding psychologist, says, is that we are all capable of these different realms of consciousness, but it's discovering how do you access it. So at that moment, accessing that, I got the information. It was not like my ego saying, okay, now go home. Suddenly, I was pulled back, and I was trembling with vibration. And I said to the organizer, I'm coming.
Right.
So that was how it began, because a few months later, I was there in southern France, and he showed me a book of some sacred sites. And suddenly, of course, you can imagine, my mouth just dropped. I saw the exact doorway.
Yes.
And I said, well, who is this? And he says, this is the cave of Saint Trophime. Lazarus is the brother of Marie Magdalena. And at that moment, I was in this sidewalk cafe in Nice, and this beam of light suddenly showed up in front of me and says, now you know who I am.
Wow.
I mean, it's sort of like, things like that started happening to me more and more frequently.
Right.
But I always come from a place of gratitude, from grace, like as if though I have been given this gift of seeing, and of understanding that there are, at that very moment, past, present, future, there's no separation, which quantum physics is now saying. So I was able to tap into another realm, in some ways. It's something I do all the time now.
Right. You're jacked in now.
You're
am open to
totally. It's like plug into another realm.
Right. Exactly. So the way it's interesting to me the way you describe these things as being very personal, and I'm on my path, and I have these kinds of these things are steering me along, and it's this person may be doing their thing, this person may be doing their thing, but everyone's kind of on an individual path. And this to me is very different from, I think, organized religion or Catholicism specifically that I have the most experience with, which is, okay, here's a list of things not to do, and here's how to be good, and everyone's going to be good in a similar way. So can you speak a little bit about the personal, how everyone is, just because two people are doing completely different things and on their own journeys, and maybe they're doing it in very different ways, that still can be a good thing and positive for both of them.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think that the other path of saying, don't do this, don't hurt people, it's coming from, even Buddhism has a name for that, the sutric path, which is, you avoid what is negative and you try to be good and kind. So some people need that structure, need that foundation to at least say, okay, I'm going to try to do the right thing. But when we become connected to an inner voice in us, like a wiser part of us. And we connect to that, and we learn to trust it. That part of us will take us to that place of doing the right thing. Because when we come from that spiritual awareness, we naturally will want to do the right thing. We naturally will want to not hurt other people. So for me, that is actually the right thing. Like Buddha once says, don't just blindly follow what I say. It's like go and discover. If what I say and teach no longer resonate, it's not the truth. It's like, don't follow that.
Well, that's something it's specific to Buddhism. Correct me if I'm wrong. They will actually change their beliefs based on new science.
Yes.
And they're very open to that.
Very open.
Right.
Yeah, and that is why I like that,
Right.
Whereas other religion would say, no, that's dangerous. Dalai Lama has said that. It's like there's certain cosmology of how the world is being built or whatever it is. It's science is not proving that. And he says, oh, well, we can let that go.
Right.
That is powerful, to not be so into fear that the way that we teach something is going to be threatened if something new or a truth is found out. And I think that there are some church, they hold to a certain belief, and they're afraid that if a truth is now integrated into it, that whole church is going to fall apart. For me, is that if it is really truth, it will actually expand it instead of shrinking it.
Right. And I'm curious what you would say to, because I think, dogmatic religions, it's very clear on, as we discussed, what not to do. How would you respond to, we talked about things being very personal and listening to your inner voice and being connected to that. How does this fit into kind of a universal moral plane? Like, are there actually, if everything's personal and we don't have a dogma to follow, how can we judge what is right or what is wrong?
Well, I say that it is very personal, but when we touch that part of us that is personal to us, but it is truth. That truth, it is a collective. Because that truth touches what we call the cosmic web. It's like the source of all. It's beautiful how I love science,
Right.
How science is now saying to us, every cell, every molecule, if you keep going, is simply space and light, a vibration. So if we no longer get stuck in our fear, and we are able to touch perhaps a part of us, which actually all of us have known that. Sometimes people call that the zone. When you are in that zone, you feel creative. Everything manifests without effort. But what is dangerous is that we get attached to that zone, or we try to artificially go back to it without realizing that there are ways that we can access it, that we can stabilize. So when we learn how to access that, how to stabilize it, how to build on it, what I call is that wisdom awareness of who we are. It is personal because it's your personal pathway. But it's sort of like, just imagine that there's a huge house. Huge house.
Okay.
Infinite. But there are so many doorways.
Right.
So you find your own doorway, but you enter into the same house, right?
Right.
So that is how I'm saying, is like, we have a personal doorway, we have a personal path, but truth is the same. Every truth that resonates is the same. It takes us to the same place. And I think that that's why all the ancient wisdom is now people are hungry for spirituality. We are wanting to go home. It's very funny. The ego understands that something is missing.
Right.
But erroneously, the ego thinks it's outside. But the ego is really wanting to find the truth, is to go home to discover that wisdom within each of us.
Can you specifically describe when you say ego, what do you mean by that?
The ego part of us, the human condition that is into the, if I do this, I will become more successful, then I feel better.
Right.
But no matter how good we feel, we always think something is missing.
Right.
So the ego part, the human condition that is in this plane, try to look for something to make us feel good. Yeah. But
Right.
that deep down, we are really, when we feel best when we are connected to something bigger.
When we're not just chasing the next thing to make us happy.
Exactly.
Right.
The egoic part of us that can push us into surviving, or to and maybe to say, oh, I need to do the right thing, so I better don't lie, better don't that, still comes from feeling there's something wrong. The church that says I'm a sinner teaches us to say there's something wrong with us. Then we split into judging others. We judge others like like if you're not in the right gender, or if you are homosexual, there's something wrong.
Right.
Rather than that doesn't define who we are. It's how we treat people. So when we really touch that grace in us, or that wiser part in us, we are connecting to a spiritual path rather than a religious path that comes from fear. I mean, look at the fear that is dominating our country right now,
Right.
splitting people against one another. And that it teaches us, instead of going deeper to find our doorway, we are looking for the outer, like the dogma, to say, okay, this is not good, this is not good. So we push our human condition. It is natural to feel jealousy. It is natural. There's a primal energy in us, in sexuality, in aggression. It's part of that human primal condition.
Right. And the from what I do understand about Buddhism, I think one of the foundational points is that if you just look inside yourself, and you can see this. You say, okay, like you mentioned, I want to go do this thing to be more successful, to be more happy. Okay, then you get that. Okay, and then you're there, and then the process just repeats. So now I need to go do this, then I need to do this, and it's never ending. And so I think Buddhism is, would you say it's more about let's be present, let's embrace what is here right now, and what's inside me right now, rather than just constantly avoiding pain and chasing pleasure.
Right. Well, being in the moment is the first step. But
Right.
what Buddhism talks about is that, the Four Noble Truths, is that there is suffering in the world. I mean, we have aging. We're going to get into fear.
Right.
But they talk about the causes of suffering is when we forget who we are, which is called ignorance. Because we're ignorant that we have an original wholeness. Originally, we are whole. Because there is that spiritual aspect of us that is whole. When we not remember that, we will go into pushing away that threaten us, and we will grab onto what makes us feel good. Now, however, Richard, it's not just Buddhism. Part of my research back into the highest teaching of Jesus Christ, especially the Gnostic Gospels, brought me back to reading the Gnostic teachings of Christ. And one of the teachings...
And remind me I should know this. I went to Catholic school for fucking years.
Okay.
The Gnostic Gospels, is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and which?
No, that is the New Testament.
That's that's how.
Yeah.
Geez,
see, okay.
That's
so
rough. Right.
So think about Catholicism. So in 1897 there was a scroll that was discovered in Egypt. Okay. And it was authenticated to be 150 AD. And it was actually the gospel teachings of Mary Magdalene that her disciples wrote down.
So these aren't in the actual Bible?
No. It got kind of discarded. And,
right, okay.
And then rediscovered. It got discarded and buried.
Got it.
And then 50 years later, it's called the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were discovered also in the Dead Sea. And these were like the Gospel of Philip, or Thomas, These were called Gnostic. Gnostic means gnosis, a direct knowing. And so Christ talks about that. It's the same thing. When I read that, I say, wow, this sounds like Buddhism. That he talks about sin simply means we miss the mark of who we are.
Right. That I do remember. Sin means missing the mark.
Missing the mark. Right. That means we miss the mark of our true nature.
Right.
We forgot our original wholeness.
Right.
And because we forget our original wholeness, we do these actions out of ignorance. So instead of condemning ourselves, is to go and discover our original wholeness, discover who we truly are. So it is coming back, isn't it? It's coming back to realize that there is
Right.
a wisdom. It's like a seed, a DNA. There is a wisdom seed in us waiting for us to come home to. And the only way to do that is when we learn to be in the moment. And that's why mindfulness, meditation, and that's why people like to go run. When
Right.
they run, they're in the moment.
Right.
So in the moment, we are no longer pushing away something we don't like. We're not grasping.
Right.
That is why being in the now is the beginning of discovering who we are. It's just a doorway. The moment is a doorway.
Right.
Now, once you enter that moment, what do you do? How do you go about it? So that's the path, and that is in a beautiful way. That's how I like to help people to discover that.
Right. So one of the things I think people would be very interested in hearing is how do you recommend that the everyday person, someone that doesn't have the experience that you have, or isn't maybe very religious, that is just a person living their life that wants to be more mindful and kind of stop just chasing the next thing, but be more okay and with the present and embrace the present. How do you? So you mentioned meditation. Is that one way? You maybe every day? Do you recommend people meditate, or what's your prescription? Is what I want to know.
Well, first of all, I would say that's why I said I love science. Science is now showing us that our reaction, all of our reaction, our thoughts, are not solid. If we really listen to our thoughts, it is like clouds, come and go.
Right.
So if we say, oh, I'm not happy, if we just sit with it and just let it be, we will actually, that unhappiness will dissolve.
Right.
So what causes suffering, and a lot of science and research is showing, is when we become identified with our fear, with our anxiety, with our depression, with our obsession.
Right.
And
so we should try to separate
create
ourselves.
Space.
Create
not
space.
Separate.
Okay.
Create
There we
space.
go. Okay. Create
All
space.
Right.
Okay.
So how do you create space? The meditation, we're so biologically hardwired that when we connect to breath, when we shift our awareness from the problem, from that part of us that is obsessed or going into the story, when we shift our awareness to, first of all, maybe even to the breath, or feel the space around us, and that breath is warm or create a particular quality, and we allow ourselves to connect to what I call self-compassion, to even name it like, oh, my fear is not who I truly am. May every breath I breathe in bring loving kindness to that part of me that is fearful. Just think about the moment you say that.
Right.
May this loving breath that I connect to bring compassion and loving kindness to this part of me that is now feeling anxious.
Right. So just kind of hold space for that.
Hold space for that
Right.
part of us that's reacting. Just 3 or 4 breaths.
Right. So even throughout the day, it doesn't even need to be
Yes.
an official, I'm going to sit down and meditate. It could be
Exactly.
just something comes up at work.
Catching that fear.
Got it. Okay.
Catching that fear. Oops, I am identifying with rushing right now.
Right.
I'm identifying with that part of me that says I don't have enough time. Just think, the moment we say we don't have enough time, our body starts panicking. We start telling ourselves what to do, We start strategizing what else we could do. But we are not present. We
Right.
are not connected. So the moment we shift that awareness or that ego identity that is feeling I don't have enough time into just that breath of space to say, wait, hold a second. I am more than this panic.
Right.
I am more than this voice that says I don't have enough time. Just let me take a deep breath. Just that simple catching that breath, riding that thought instead of
Right.
becoming that thought.
Right. So if you could tell kind of everyone on earth just the simplest kind of, okay, at the very least do this. So
Yes.
that's what you would, that's
Yeah.
kind of your go-to.
Exactly. My
Right.
go-to always is your thoughts, your fear, your reaction is not who you truly are.
Right.
All right. So take a deep breath.
Right.
Breathe into your heart. Feel as if though your heart is kind of like as spacious as the sky.
Right.
Infinite. You know? Just keep breathing. Feel that breath. The moment you breathe, I love science research. It shows that it activates in our brain something called the relaxation response. We begin to relax the tight grab, the grabbing that identity. So we allow that fear reaction to slow down, like taming a wild horse, not running this path. And we can slow down and redirect our attention.
Right.
So during the day, just keep becoming aware of your reaction. In my book, I call this the ABC,
Okay.
awareness. You're aware, you're triggered. Breathe. Be.
Right.
C, compassionately observing. Compassion means you're not judging.
Aware, breathe, compassion.
Yeah, ABC.
ABC. I love it.
I teach people back to the basic. Learn your ABC.
Right. So in that vein of teaching people, I've seen you have these these types of conversations with people where you're trying to I like to call it jacking in. So you're trying to you're kind of feeling out their energy, and you're talking to them and kind of helping them bring out what's already inside. I'm curious. I want to ask about when you approach a person, maybe someone you've never met, or even someone that is coming to see you in your office right here. Are you, when they're coming into, because I know you're sensitive to this, when they're coming into your space, you can feel their talk to me about how you feel their energy and how you kind of feel what's going on inside them.
Beautiful question. Again, I always say, look, this is not woo-woo, because science shows that we actually have something called the energy field.
Right.
Our body actually has all of this electromagnetic field.
Right.
We sense one another. We can go into a room. If someone has just had an argument, we feel there's a tension. Even if they are silent, we feel it.
Right.
So we're constantly communicating. So I think that I'm very blessed. Like I say, I've been doing this for 30 years, even before I went into meditation and deepened that, is that I have this ability to connect to this energy field. And through 30 years of cultivating and building, is that I can now sense someone's energy field in my field. I can feel when something is off. But also the most important is that I can see the light that is in them.
Right.
I can feel where they might be stuck. So in many respects, it's like I have learned to, like my whole being is like a giant pendulum or crystal.
Right.
That I can pick up on energy, and I learn how not to get stuck in someone's energy, so that I can simply be a channel. But it comes from what I would call the wisdom of realizing, not be stuck in someone's story, but that there is compassion for someone's suffering. So that when someone comes in, just by sitting with them, and I could feel, and sometimes I see images as if though how now they have this hologram, right? Holographic thing. You plug in and you see an image. Well, in some ways, that's what I do. There's actually a science book called The Holographic Field, or the holographic mind. So maybe that helps explain that I actually can see into what shamans call the darkness, or see into the dark. Shaman is a Siberian word from the verb samon, which means to see, the ability to see in the dark. It's not seeing so much as that you may be seeing, but sensing, seeing, feeling something that is not visible.
Right. So
it is invisible to human eyes, but everything is a wave of energy. It's just wave. So I have the grace and to see in the wavelength, the waves of people, the images, the story they may carry. And some people, can only like isn't that it's so funny how the rainbow, like when the rain, after rain you can see the rainbow, but what is the rainbow? It's like a prism of light. So the light is always there. It's just that we can't see it unless because of the rain,
Right.
we can suddenly see into this other world.
Right. Right.
So I see into the rainbow realm, I guess.
Well,
I can see
right.
the light.
The rainbow realm. I love it. Well, speaking of the rainbow realm, we have some tarot cards in front of us, and I think we talked about this before the show. I think it would be interesting to for me to pull a card. I think a lot of people know what tarot cards are. I think they kind of think it's the most people's experience is you got in the strip mall, you got the psychic, you pay them $10 and they wave their hands. So I should share that my mom has been she's a student of yours, has been doing tarot cards throughout my entire life. So I've always been, and she's done them as I've grown up and at different different stages of my life. And I think people mistake them for superstition or that magical. This card means that this thing's going to happen. No. When in reality it's okay. This is the card you chose. It could have been maybe and correct me if I'm wrong, but it could have been any card. The point is that you chose this one, and now we're gonna kind of talk about what this one means.
Exactly, like the reader tune into your energy field. Because tarot cards, it just simply means that there's something on the outer symbolism, connect to your intention, connect to an energy wave, and from that, the card is pulled is it kind of like resonate with your question.
Right.
So then the reader can look at that card and drop into that energy field in that cosmos of interconnection with you, and so can then give you a message.
Right.
And so it is not like etched in stone, like a fortune telling. It's more of affirming something or helping point out something that you already know to be. But the card itself can be like an affirmation or deepening.
Well, let's. So we have 3 decks in front of us.
Decks. Okay.
I think you've.
I'm gonna pick one for you.
Is
it for you or for something else?
let's do me. Let's make so we'll pick this deck.
Okay. So there's an intention.
Okay.
All right. So you said your intention. You don't even have to tell me. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna just pull one card here.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. It's from the Osho deck. It's called the Creator.
Okay. And can you describe the?
Okay. So it is like a Buddha sitting in meditation pose, and there is like light coming from his heart area. Okay. All right. So it's called the Creator. So, and there is a lot of fire around this. It's like a beautiful radiant light. So I feel as if though who you are now, you are connecting to that inner creator, like the one who is called to do this kind of podcast.
Right. I was just thinking that. This is actually a funny card. This is this is totally.
Yeah. So you are on this creator path. You are listening to the one who is the creator and connecting. So let's draw another card that will help you to amplify this.
This is another deck?
Yes, this is called Kuan Yin. It's called the Orchid Priestess of Destiny.
There we go.
You are listening to your destiny.
Right.
That you recognize you're answering a calling, and that you are surrendering to this. And it is really beautiful. It says that this is your path, that you are here, and it may not even make sense as to why you're doing this.
Right.
But you are answering a call. And that's what I mean about the cards kind of go deeper into helping you understand. So the third card I'm going to draw is from actually the Blessed Mother.
Okay.
Wow. The Blessed Mother says, Our Lady of the Inner Gate. Wow. So you are actually being called through all this to discover your inner gate. Remember, we talk about a doorway. It's very personal.
Right.
So when we discover our personal doorway, it's like the inner gate. Inner gate to your wisdom, inner gate to your spiritual being. So this podcast that you are doing, you are here to say, oh, I want to interview people, share it, and see what happens.
Right.
But that is your gift. That is something calls to you. It energizes you to do this. So you are, by listening, maybe nothing will pan out, who knows?
Sure.
But by answering it, Richard, you are answering this inner voice, this feeling of this feels right.
Right.
And so if you keep doing it, something else will open. It's like opening this door. So the
Right.
first thing is you are listening to the Creator, following your path, your destiny that takes you through this inner gate to who you truly are.
Boom. All connected. I love that. My mom, she always shares stories with me. She calls it a synchronicity, or
Yes.
when things
Yeah,
just
Jung says that.
Right.
Carl Jung talks
Okay.
about the synchronicity,
right.
that this is just a web.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Though that's I mean that was that that I really appreciate you kind of channeling me, pulling these cards,
Yeah.
and because it does. I'm glad we got to see an example, and people can understand a little bit how it works.
Right. For example, what are we trying to do right now in the world?
Right.
We are going through a period of integration.
Right. So she did just pull another card. That's
Yeah.
the integration. This is the Osho deck.
This is the Osho deck.
Right.
So I'm just being called to say, well, what's happening right now in our country?
Right.
We're being pulled, and we are trying to integrate certain things,
Right. Well, that's actually we talked a bit about the show, and before the show, if I could bring up, what's happening,
to the soul of our country.
Exactly, with Trump in the White House, and also with many powerful men being outed for sexual assault. So there's I think in Unbinding the Soul, you talk about how it takes a crisis
Yes.
to kind of
Correct.
really get us to the next step. And
Yes.
is this that crisis? Do you see
Absolutely.
kind of a shift?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We cannot grow unless there's a crisis.
Right.
So in some ways, we have to realize is that we all created this. We cannot say, oh, if only Hillary did this, if only this. There
Right.
was a certain perfect kind of like a design that brought all of this to serve to wake us up to the shadow of how the feminine or how women have been oppressed.
Right. I think you mentioned shining a light. Sarah Silverman recently in an interview, she's Jewish, and she talks about how I think she gave an example of Mel Gibson,
Yes.
who a while back was saying anti-Semitic comments, and she said she loves when that happens because it shines a light on it. Because when you don't have these kind of public displays of either racism, sexism, people can argue, look, it doesn't exist. I don't see it. But when you shine a light on it, it allows us to actually have these conversations and
Absolutely.
heal. Right.
Absolutely. And also it had to be so huge, because unless it is so huge, like I remember Mel Gibson said that, but it took, look at us, it took so much that is happening, in the whole country for us to say, no, that cannot happen again.
Right.
So I think the soul of the country is going through a crisis,
Right.
but it's so important we don't go into blame or anger.
Right.
Of course, anger naturally arises, but beneath anger, if we can recognize the compassion that these people, they have just been brought up in a certain way to think that all of this is okay. We are not saying that they are to be condemned and they are terrible people and whatever it is. Compassion doesn't mean condoning too, doesn't mean rescuing.
Right.
Compassion means that you're not judging that person to be a nasty human being. You are recognizing this person has been misled, blind, like all of these male, there are certain men that think that,
Right.
oh, you need to laugh along, a joke,
Right.
just to be included.
Right.
So I think that in our culture, the feminine has been oppressed. Women, we were not given the vote. Look at, there's still country that the women have no rights.
It's funny because right before I interviewed Jackie Hansen earlier today, and she was very instrumental in actually helping a lot of these long distance running events for women actually make it in the Olympics. They didn't have the some of these longer events. They only had them for men, and women. Even as recently as 2008, they finally got the 3,000 meter steeplechase. So it's interesting that this isn't something yet. Women got the right to vote fairly. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, in this 2008 example, it's all fairly recent. This is not behind us. We are still very much dealing with it.
We're still dealing with it. And on another note, it's very interesting, like, for example, people think about 2012 with the Mayan prophecy that the world is coming to the end. But what the prophecy actually says, the world as we understand it, like perhaps the patriarchal world, is coming to an end. It's ushering in what they call the fifth world sun, which is more about sacred partnership. It is ushering in the sacred feminine. The feminine, or the women, have to first becoming respected, seen in a different light. Then, truly, for the first time, that there can be that conscious masculine can also rise up. Then we can have sacred partnership, the male-female energy. So it's not just about men and women, but of course, this is very much into. And I'm not saying that all men are bad or all women are great. It's more that there's a culture that seen women as more like a object or second class, you know, and that, and it's not just, or even the quality of compassion, the quality of connectedness is seen as not as good as power, aggression. And so we it's like we cannot let people do that to us. Let's just stand up, So that still comes from a distorted male energy of aggression, of taking over, like working with guns, It's like I have to have a bigger power, So the feminine, it comes not from that kind of a power. That power comes from collaboration. The power comes from speaking truth. Acting from that place, not being fearful to speak truth. I mean, that is an amazing power.
Right, and something that I think is kind of in the public consciousness recently and is being debated is, well, and personally, men and women, I do believe they are equal, but I think some people take it a step further than that and say they all think of them as the same. Men are the same as women, and I think or women are the same as men. And I think what you and my mom also talks about this is that, no, there's a divine masculine, there's a divine feminine. We don't have to all be the same in order for us to channel what we need to, and for us to live in a prosperous world, if you will. So I think, is that how you do you agree with that? Am I right in that? And that we're kind of, for example, you as a woman, me as a man, will you have more divine feminine kind of tendencies than I will as a man?
Right. For example, I hear what you're saying. It's like that we have differences. I may have certain strength, but doesn't mean that I am better than you.
Right.
It's to recognize our strength. It's to recognize, okay, maybe being a woman, we may have certain strength. Being a man, have certain strength.
Right.
How can we respect each other's strength?
Right.
How can we stop comparing?
Right.
And to support one another, to encourage, to build a teamwork. You know, and I feel as if though it's like that. A lot of politicians have forgotten that we are here to be of service. You know, and to be of service, to have more of a world of opportunity to help those that are not as fortunate. But doesn't mean to just rescue people, but it's to empower people. How do we create better education, better housing, better healthcare, so that people are not always struggling? I think even Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs. When you're stuck at that lower survival needs, you don't really go more into spirituality or actualization.
You're just trying to eat.
Exactly. And my sense is that we have this this obligation, this truth in us to say we are here to provide some basic services, basic needs to help people, so that we can then come from this place, the same platform, to have education. Not that we are all going to be the same, but that we can be offered the same opportunities in life. That would be wonderful.
Right.
You know, doesn't mean that we're going to say, oh, everybody's, going to be perfect. That's idealistic.
Right.
But we are saying, let's work to say, what can we do to help others? What can we do to make this more a better world, a world of opportunity, a world that the people, instead of suffering, can have the help when they're in a point of crisis, so that they don't lose their house, they don't become homeless.
Right.
So
what can we do to help others? I love that. Raven, this has been an excellent talk. I really appreciate you letting me come in here and being very open about your experience and your world. And thank you so much. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard, the creator.
Richard, the creator. There we go. Thank you.
Bye-bye.